The gospel the last few weeks, we hear Jesus speaking to the religious people in the community. This week, he addresses the chief priests and elders of the people. Jesus is trying to teach them an important lesson, because even though they behave piously and they observe the religious laws, they did not take those laws from their head and into their hearts. They followed the religious practices, but they did not accept or follow Jesus. They did not recognize or accept God living among them and treat their brothers and sisters with compassion, as Jesus did. So Jesus skillfully tells them a parable about two sons. A father asks each of his sons in turn to go into the vineyard and work. But the first refuses his father right away, and he tells him that he will not go into the vineyard. But he thinks about it a little bit, and then he reconsiders. The second son tells his father that he will do the work, but he doesn't follow through. So then Jesus asked the religious leaders which did the father's will. And when they choose the first son, who refused, but eventually did what his father asked him to do, Jesus has some very hard words for these religious leaders. He says, "Tax collectors and prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God before you." Sinners are entering the kingdom of God, and I who observe the law will not? You can see why the religious leaders of the day did not get along with Jesus very well. So the challenge for us today is in prayer to think about how we can relate in our own practice of the faith to each of the two sons. I have to admit, I can sometimes be a lot like the second son, wanting to be dutiful and to do the right thing, to say yes and to have good intentions when promised or challenged to do something new that I believe will help me to grow. But in practice, without intentionality, the very thing that I said I would do, I do not do. Recently, I was at That Man Is You, and I shared with my table of brothers that I often advise other people to do this prayer called the Examen. It's an Ignatian prayer that's often used at the end of the day to reflect with gratitude to God for the many blessings that you experienced that day. To walk through the day with God and recognize those moments in which God was with you. And to also recognize the other moments in which God was there, but you failed to recognize him. That we failed to live what God wanted us to do in that moment. And finally, in the Examen, you look ahead to the next day and you try to get a sense of how that day is going to go and how you're going to remain close to God in that, letting him help you overcome the challenges in your day and being intentional about keeping him in your heart as we interact with other people around us. So that morning at That Man Is You, I had to admit that even though I have good intentions of doing that Examen prayer every day, I wasn't being motivated to practice or intentionally stay with it. It's really too easy at the end of a long day simply to just forget to do it, or to even decide that it's too late and I just don't have it in me to do this reflection on my day. So one of the guys at the table challenged me, and he offered to let me text him every day when I did the Examen prayer, to let him know that I was following up, that I was doing what I said that I would do. And every day this week, I prayed the Examen. I remained motivated to pray, and I walked through each day with God. And it has given me peace and helped me to reflect with gratitude on all the gifts that God gives me that I often don't even recognize. And it helps me to recognize the people around me and the way I need to be Christ to them, in spite of the fact that this was a very challenging work week for me. So this coming week, brothers and sisters, let us take some time in prayer to ask God to soften our hearts. We are all here this morning with good intention, to attend Mass and to practice our faith, to do what is good and pleasing to God. And like the second brother, we are beginning our week saying yes to do the good will of the Father. Now, the hard part is coming. Let's be intentional this week about following through on that yes. Relating our struggles and our problems, our gratitude and joys to God in prayer. That's key. We have to be talking to God in prayer. And then being thankful for the many gifts that He is giving us. Looking for the opportunities to work in His vineyard as He has asked us to do. Helping us to be kind and compassionate to others. That in doing so, our religious practice and faith may continually move from our heads to our hearts as we continually strive to grow as disciples of Jesus Christ.